good friend, Ambassador John Bass. I want to welcome you to the Arizona State University Barrett and O'Connor Center and the presentation of our blueprints for a more modern U.S. diplomatic service. We are very grateful that you have joined us here today, both in person and virtually. My name is Mike Polt. I am the ASU Ambassador in Residence and co-founder of the Lab for Leadership, Diplomacy, and National Security at ASU. The university and our lab have been very proud to be the hosts of this project with the participation of the Chapman Cox Foundation and the American Academy of Diplomacy. You've already taken your seats, so don't have to deliver the entire next sentence. I said, please start lunch. You're way ahead of me as usual. But I'd like to thank our very special guests who have joined us here today. Ambassador John Bass, Undersecretary of State for Management. Ms. Margot Branscombe, the president of the Chapman Cox Foundation, who's joining us online. Ambassador, is Ann here, Ann Patterson? Of course, Ambassador Ann Patterson, a member of the Board of Trustees of the Cox Foundation. Mr. Bill Clifford, the president and CEO of the World Affairs Councils of America. It was a great pleasure meeting you and speaking to you earlier. A very, very dear friend of our lab, of the university, of all of ASU students, Ms. Laura Roskind, a member of the ASU Board of Trustees, and who, together with her husband, Herb, have been benefactors and friends of the university for many, many years. Without them, our university would not be what it is. It's so great to have you here, Laura. Thank you very much for joining us today. Ambassador Eric Rubin, the president of the American Foreign Service Association, that represents all of us throughout our careers in the Foreign Service. Ambassador Ron Newman of the American Academy of Diplomacy, heading that organization that so many of us are active in to advance the interests of the Foreign Service. And of course, members of congressional staffs who've joined us here today. I wish to also thank very particularly my colleague and CAB co-founder, Lieutenant General Ben Frakely, sitting right next to Ambassador Mark Grossman. Ben's deep experience and national leadership in recruiting and training the entire U.S. Army helped inform our lab's contribution to this project deeply, and I'm very grateful that he's here today. I also want to mention Ambassadors Moore and O'Donnell, along with our senior lab director, Ms. Kathy Cook, Ms. Ashley Wright, and Ms. Nikki Hinshaw, who lent their experience on our team in the lab and all their energies to hosting this project and to making this event today possible. And finally, and very importantly, I would like to thank all of our ASU students who were our research aides, our colleagues, our co-drafters, and ask them to stand in order for us to give them a round of applause. And I'd like to mention their names: Aman Bareskai, Joey Josen, Simon Lee, Nicole Maestas, Molly Sexton, Mia Spare, Joe Thomas, Jesus Vega, and Nicholas Davis, who is not with us. Thank you guys very, very much. When I asked the president's office at ASU whether we could bring these students to Washington and have them be part of this event that they share so much in having completed, the first answer was, just send them and send me the bill. And I mean it that way. So it was very easy. These men and women that I've just introduced to you are proud representatives of the ASU charter that defines our university, by whom we include and not by whom we exclude, and how they succeed. It is this charter that makes ASU a student-centric university, and not only the most innovative, but also one of the most diverse institutions in this country, representative of the American people and the communities it serves. Our diplomacy project seeks to help our foreign service to be similarly representative of the American people. Just a few very quick organizational points about today's event. You've already started your lunch. After this the introduction by our co-chairs, Ambassadors Grossman and Reese, Ambassador Ray will lead us through the rest of the presentations by the blueprint teams, and then lead the Q&A session. In the room, one of my colleagues will pass around the microphone, and for the online guests, Nikki Hinshaw will go ahead and take questions online and pass them to Ambassador Ray. Please feel free to use our hashtags if you are so inclined. Looking at some of the ages of people like me, you probably don't do that, but we have lots of young people who think that this is the day of the watchword of the day. So now I have the great pleasure to turn the floor over to our project leadership, co-chairs Ambassador Mark Grossman, Ambassador Marcy Reese, and then our executive director, Ambassador Charles Ray. And with that, over to you, Mark.
Mike, thank you very much. And let me thank you for all that you have done to make this day a reality. And I also want to just welcome everybody who is on Zoom. We feel that you are a part of this event. Thank you very much for joining as well. I want to thank, as Mike did, all of the people who had a hand in making this event come together. Everybody who organized this event, everybody who's in this room knows it's not an easy task. And so thank everybody who was an organizer. And I wanted, if you'd allow me, just to take one extra special second to follow up on a thank you of Mike Polt, and that's to recognize Kathy Cook of Arizona State University, who's been spectacularly professional, dedicated, good-humored, and patient since the very beginning. And if you join me in giving a round of applause to Kathy Cook. I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes on history and motivation. As some of you know, in November of 2020, Marcy Reese, Nick Burns, and I, joined initially by Nancy McEldowney, and with the participation of the wonderful Una Chapman Cox Foundation, and supported by the Belfer Center at Harvard University, and after a year-long, very broad consultation, issued a report we called A Diplomatic Service for the 21st Century. We said that in a world of rapid change, full of challenges and opportunities, diplomacy is more important than ever. We said that American citizens expect and deserve to be represented by the world's most modern and able diplomatic service. In that report, which you might call phase one of the American Diplomacy Project, we collected ideas and we provided a vision for the future, a way that things could be. After that report was released, Marcy and I were very, very encouraged by what we learned and what we heard, including from so many people in this room and so many people on Zoom. We spoke to groups in our foreign affairs community. We testified in Congress. We met Hill staff. And thanks to Bill Clifford, we spoke to World Affairs Councils across the nation. We were encouraged by Secretary Blinken's October 2021 speech on making U.S. diplomacy more modern, and by the reforms and the changes to be or that are already being implemented. And we decided to move to phase two. And the document that you have in front of you is the result. And Marcy will tell you a little bit more about it. We were again supported by the Cox Foundation, and Arizona State University became our institutional home. The American Academy of Diplomacy supported the professional education and training blueprint. And I must say that the authors of every one of these blueprints, our legislative writer, our editor, were exactly the right people to have created these blueprints. And Charlie Ray has been our partner as executive director throughout. What's new about phase two is that we offer 4 practical, affordable, and achievable blueprints that change the way American diplomacy works. What's the same, although we've narrowed our focus, is that we're guided by the same commitments from the first report. First, we remain committed to transparency with the State Department, with the Congress, and with the many communities interested in these issues. And so, John, I thank you and all of your colleagues at the State Department for their cooperation. Second, we remain committed to bipartisanship. Third, we remain convinced that the State Department must change to earn its place at the center of U.S. foreign policy making and execution, and because the United States needs the world's most modern and able diplomatic service. All of the blueprints include two themes which ran through phase one. First, what we called in that report a relentless focus on diversity and inclusion, and secondly, a need to change the culture at the State Department. And finally, and of key importance to us, we offer these blueprints in gratitude and in respect for those who are serving our country at home and abroad today, and those who will serve it in the future. So I thank you very much for being able to participate in this, and I turn the floor over to Marcy Reese.
Bear with me for a second. Us altitudinally challenged people need special arrangements. Okay, so I want to join Mark in welcoming all of you. We're just delighted to have you here, and thank you so much for taking the time. This is an exciting moment. Seeing the project that started really as an idea. How can experienced former diplomats give ideas and energy to what we saw as the need for modernization of the Foreign Service to today, when we have in hand these ideas turned into blueprints? So why did we call them blueprints? We wanted to make clear that this phase of the study was about making ideas operational. We already did the why. Now is the time to focus on how. We thought about how buildings get built. It requires plans that serve as a guide for those who are going to do the building. And of course, you need to hire experts to make the plans. Those are the people sitting at your tables who actually did the work. You might ask, why did we choose these 4 projects for our blueprints? We concluded that it made sense to begin with mission and mandate because it is foundational for our diplomats. It's the basis for the rest of the modernization effort. The State Department cannot fully carry out its 2 most important functions, advising the President on foreign policy and leading on implementing that policy abroad, without a well-defined mission and mandate that is understood and respected. And second, we are all aware that our diplomats face very highly trained and sophisticated competitors around the world. Our idea was to give them the means to up their game. We wanted to give them an enhanced program of education and training, but woven into that and into the personnel blueprint are measures aimed at changing attitudes, at changing the culture, so that career-long education is seen as a benefit, and taking a year or even several years to get an advanced degree is viewed as career enhancing, not as a digression from real work. We also took on the problem of managers' attitudes, their understandable reluctance to let people leave without the possibility of reinforcements. Our authors will talk about how we propose to develop and protect a true training complement for this purpose. Third, we had many reasons for focusing on a more modern personnel system, but here are a few of the most important. We wanted to ensure that our professionals have the opportunity to lead at increasing levels of responsibility, so they have the skills and the experience, and frankly, the incentive to progress to some of the department's top jobs. We wanted to take concrete measures, not just to promote, but to bake in diversity and inclusion into our personnel system. For example, by ramping up recruitment with a focus on doing more in more places around the United States. And to adjust our rules and regulations to take care of our people in a changing environment, to be more flexible, to keep up with social change, for example, to better accommodate 2-career households. Finally, as we have seen most recently from the pandemic, where the Foreign Service really stepped up to evacuating tens of thousands of Americans. And with Afghanistan, we need additional surge capability to call upon so we can handle natural disasters and political emergencies without leaving empty other key positions. That is why we chose to develop the idea of a diplomatic reserve corps. We are excited, as Mark said, that there is already interest in modernization of our diplomacy on the part of the State Department leadership, several congressional committees, and currently serving diplomats. As we all know, there is no real change without belief, energy, organization, hard work. We hope that when you hear what our authors have to say and have a look at what they have written, you will be persuaded that these ideas are worth pursuing, that you will talk about them with friends and colleagues and begin to form what we hope will be a cooperative, mutually reinforcing effort to make them reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcy, and thank you all for being here. I am truly honored to have been associated with this project and with the stellar team of people who have been working tirelessly over the last 6 to 9 months to put it together. I'd like to especially single out 2 people, though they've been mentioned, but I think they deserve a little extra mention. One is someone I call Charlie too, because he and I share the same first name. Charles Armstrong, our legislative drafter, who put the vision into legislative language. And last, but certainly not least, and probably the most important person on the team is Ms. Kathy Guest, who turned our bureaucratic jargon into English that everyone could understand. You know, I spent 30 years in the Foreign Service, but I spent my formative years, 20 of them. I grew up in the Army, and so I sort of have a habit of having to have a way of describing things that's catchy. You know, like in the military, we don't say food, we say meals ready to eat, or we shorten and say MRE. The blueprint, that's fine, blueprint, but that's too generic, and I'm not an engineer anyway. And so I call what we've done a PRI, plan ready to implement. And that's what we are giving you, is a plan that has been thoroughly scrubbed, coordinated, vetted, rewritten, and redrafted more times than I can even count. I almost had to get a separate drive for my computer just to keep the various versions. But what is here, as has been said, is our hope for the American diplomatic service of the present and the future to do what we were organized and created to do in 1924, and that's provide this country with the most professional diplomatic service on the planet. And I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but I think we've come up with a fairly good PRI. And I would like to introduce our team leaders who will come up and tell you a bit about each of their parts, starting with Ambassador Mike Polt, who will talk about mission and management. Mike, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Charlie. And I'm delighted to lead off our highlights of the blueprint presentation today and talking about mission and mandate proposals that we have come up with. I'd like to remind us that what the State Department says its mission to be. On the website, it says to protect and promote U.S. security, prosperity, and democratic values, and shape an international environment in which all Americans can thrive. Let us call that the what, and our blueprints to add some contributions to the why and the how to meet that very noble mission. A more modern U.S. diplomatic service must be professional, in the lead, fully present abroad, and connected at home. Professional, as the members of our service must be well-trained and well-resourced, partnered in some circumstances with uniquely qualified non-career individuals, and produce the best results for the American people. Non-career appointees from the public and private sectors must be held to a similar standard of competence in foreign affairs expertise and leadership as our career officers. And I am so pleased and so grateful that my good friend and colleague and former boss, Ambassador Richard Verma, is here with us today, because he's an example of the kind of outside professional partnership that we're looking for. I was very proud to serve under him and with him, and that he was part and is part of our foreign affairs family as he's with us today. Thank you very much for coming, Rich. Really appreciate it. We propose an amendment to the 1980 Foreign Service Act to set the standard that our diplomats, including career and non-career diplomatic leadership, are the U.S. government's preeminent substantive experts on the international environment they seek to shape. This amendment would also sharpen existing legislative language, mandating that the President provide the Senate with a persuasive competency report based on this standard on each Chief of Mission nominee. And our diplomatic and foreign service needs to be in the lead, as our Chiefs of Mission abroad and our State Department senior officials at home must lead a whole of government effort of achieving our nation's foreign policy goals. We propose a new presidential letter of authority to all U.S. Chiefs of Mission that would reaffirm and reinforce ambassadorial authority, responsibility, and accountability. This would include directing the actions and supervising the use of resources of all U.S. government agencies abroad. And we propose corresponding amendments to the Foreign Service Act reinforcing those principles. At home, we propose that the State Department chair the Assistant Secretary level interagency policy coordinating committees, the foundational mechanisms that develop U.S. foreign policy. To that effect, we propose a change to the National Security Memorandum that currently assigns chairmanship of all national security interagency policy coordination structures to members of the NSC staff. Fully present abroad means that our diplomats must serve throughout the world, including in high-risk environments. Only this makes them able to achieve their primary mission to influence host governments, to explain, defend, and advance U.S. policies, and to correctly analyze political, social, and economic developments, as well as the effectiveness of U.S. government programs. The protection of U.S. personnel and property is of crucial importance, but the presence of risk must not make it impossible or severely curtail our ability to do the job that is job one, and that is to achieve our mission. We endorse current legislative efforts in the House and the Senate that support the Foreign Service at being there and taking reasonable and necessary risks to advance U.S. foreign policy. In the end, it is our ambassadors who must carry the ultimate responsibility for risk management decisions in their areas of service. And finally, connected at home. This requires that our diplomats, in effect, report back to the American people as their ultimate employer in a consistent and comprehensive manner on how they carried out the nation's foreign policy. We propose an amendment to the Foreign Service Act, again, to authorize the formal assignment of 500 Foreign Service members each year for speaking assignments in all 50 states in what we would call a new Engage America program. Orders to participate in this program would authorize and encourage families to join the service member because families have valuable insights they can share with American audiences on their own contributions to serving our country. We know full well that the Foreign Service is a team effort for all the members of a Foreign Service team serving abroad. To manage the program, to stay with the blueprint vision of practicality, to manage the program, we propose the establishment of a new Engage America office in the State Department's Bureau of Global Public Affairs. This new office would identify and assign outreach locations based on U.S. foreign policy priorities and the expressed interests of the American audiences. We estimate this program to cost approximately $3 million per annum. So these four guiding principles then: professionalism, leadership, presence in all environments, and with a strong link to the American people, we propose as a foundational mission and mandate of our diplomats in support of shaping an international environment in which all Americans can thrive. Thank you very much. So I'll take over a little bit of the next would be Ambassadors Barr and Smith, please.
Silence is not good on the Zoom. I apologize for that. It's great to see so many wonderful faces and friends and reconnect and have this opportunity to share with you all the important work that Joyce Barr, Ambassador Barr, and I have been doing. We're really pleased to offer the Professional Education and Training Blueprint, one of the four that Marcy outlined as part of the American Diplomacy Project Phase 2. I want to thank Ambassadors Grossman, Reese, and Ray for their leading this effort and acknowledge the extraordinary support that Joyce and I both received from Ambassador Ron Newman and the American Academy of Diplomacy, as well as the advisory group that Ambassador Newman pulled together, several whose members are here today. Thank you for joining us. We also want to thank Arizona State University's terrific team, led by Ambassador Polt, for the outstanding logistical and technical support that enabled all of our work. And finally, as several have already acknowledged, without the work and support of the Una Chapman Cox Foundation, none of this would have been possible. So very grateful to them for their continued support. Ambassador Barr and I are going to discuss only two elements of our blueprint. First, that she will focus on is by far the most important, which is what is the training complement and how do we protect that and sustain that over time. And I'm going to talk about training and development at four stages of a career. From the outset, though, I want to stress that our approach has been not just to look at the Foreign Service, but also the civil service, whose training and professional development needs are just as critical to the success of the Department of State and its leadership of U.S. foreign policy. Ultimately, the goals of our recommendation is to promote a culture which values and prioritizes training and professional education and development over the course of a career. This is not going to be easy. This involves, as Ambassador Reese was indicating, a cultural shift, a cultural change. We know many examples, some of whom are in this room, of people who've had very stellar careers, who spent very little time in training and development. Our hats are off to them, but we don't think we can afford that as an institution as we go forward in this regard. Too often in the past, training has been viewed as a luxury, not as something vital to our mission. Perhaps the only exception in that regard is foreign language training, but even there, it has too often been cut short or waived to meet whatever urgent need arises. We can no longer afford this. Shifting the culture, though, will require changes not just in the Foreign Service promotion precepts and assignment process, but more flexibility in the civil service personnel system. Recognition at all levels of the department of the importance of training and professional development. We also think an important component of this, and this will be discussed by Ambassador Kennedy, is the Reserve Corps. Too often, the training component has been viewed as a Reserve Corps the department can draw on in any emergency circumstances. That can't any longer continue. We need to find another way to meet those urgent needs, and it should not come at the expense of training and development. Above all, though, all of this will require sufficient resources, the most important of which is personnel. And that's why I'm going to turn this over to Ambassador Barr, who will talk about our findings with regard to the training complement.
Thank you. Phase 1 of the American Diplomacy Project called for congressional authorization and funding for a 15% increase in Foreign Service personnel levels to create a training float like that maintained by the U.S. military. We wanted to confirm that number. First, we changed the terminology from training float to training complement to underscore its importance to workforce preparation and to move away from the idea that training positions are a stockpile also available for use on the next new crisis or initiative. Then we looked at the numbers. The current training complement is about 4% of the permanent career U.S. direct hire workforce. This is not enough, even for the Foreign Service alone. As of May, we were 300 positions short in terms of training, meaning that there were 300 jobs that sat vacant while employees completed their training. As has already been mentioned, it will be neither easy nor quick to figure out how many additional positions the department needs. The Foreign Service does most of its hiring at the entry level, so it will take years before adding new positions will have an impact on the number of training complement positions available at the mid and senior levels. Therefore, the training target number must be realistic, flexible, and sustainable. Based on our research and discussions, we recommend a training complement of 8% that would be built over the next 4 fiscal years. The department would get a total of 250 positions each year, 150 Foreign Service and 100 Civil Service. Once the 8% goal has been reached, the department will then reevaluate whether it needed additional positions. In addition to money for the actual positions, the funding should also include additional associated training costs, especially for FSI. The floor or minimum amount for doubling the training complement over the next 4 fiscal years would be at least $53 million per year, or a total of $212 million. And I want to emphasize that that would be the lowest amount. To increase training and professional development opportunities department-wide, we also support efforts to construct a civil service training complement for the first time. This would be accompanied by work designed to create a more robust civil service mobility program for this vital part of the workforce. Building an 8% training complement will need the active support of the Secretary of State, others in the executive branch, and crucially, members of Congress. Thank you for your attention. Now I'll turn it back to Ambassador Smith, who will talk about the 4 stages of training.
Thank you, Ambassador Barr. You know, the American Diplomacy Project original focus when it came to education and training was on 4 career stages: the entry level, the mid-level, the pre-senior level, and the senior level. we decided to pick up on that, but to dig in a lot more deeply about what currently exists, recognizing that FSI, and I want to acknowledge Ambassador Maureen Cormack, who's here from the acting director of FSI, but recognizing what already exists, what has been built, and what would be the needs going forward at all of these 4 stages. And a lot of it has to do not just with training at FSI, but other things that we would recommend. At the entry level, it's important that we felt to recognize and support the things and the initiatives that FSI has implemented to break down barriers and build a stronger sense of one team across employment categories. Those efforts we feel strongly should continue. Although more may be needed for the civil service, we concluded that lengthening training for foreign service entry-level employees should not be the priority for reasons we can discuss. Instead, the department should look to increase opportunities for such employees to work domestically before they go overseas for short periods, as well as more overseas rotational jobs, which we all, many of us at least, in the course of our careers benefited from, but have disappeared over time because of the needs of the service. We think that would be an important use of a training complement. At the mid-level, FSI should continue its efforts to rebuild a mandatory mid-level training program to help employees develop the skills and insights needed to take on greater leadership roles and serve successfully in more senior positions. This is a critical stage at which many of our employees are left on their own devices to figure out what they do when they are first-time supervisors or suddenly thrust into important leadership positions. In the future, we think that this training should be combined as a growth opportunity with 4 to 6 months intra-departmental or interagency or private sector details designed to broaden awareness of national security issues and challenges and build productive networks. We think this would be a valuable use of a training complement at the mid-level. At the pre-senior level, once the requisite increase in the training complement reaches this level, and that takes time, as we know, in the Foreign Service system, the department must make mandatory a professional development tour as a prerequisite for entry into the senior foreign service, something that the American Foreign Service Association has already advocated. We think that's an important step forward. We think the same should be true on the senior executive service side as well. To accomplish this, however, the department needs to increase the number of slots available to the department at the National Defense University or one of the service-connected war colleges, and open up new opportunities across the country for personnel to pursue a master's degree or certificate program at institutions that have traditionally not had much of a nexus to the Foreign Service or the State Department. At the senior level, FSI must provide additional training beyond the 2-week senior executive level course. FSI has already recognized this. They've now introduced, Ambassador Cormack was telling me, a new course for first-time Deputy Assistant Secretaries. We think that is an important step forward, but we think additional training is needed at this level. This has been recognized for quite some time. There is, except for those who go on to be DCM or principal officer or chief of mission, there is no training offered beyond the senior executive leadership course, which is a 2-week course for seniors. That's inadequate, to be honest. We think that the State Department or the FSI should develop a 4 to 6 week interagency capstone course to enhance diplomatic and communication skills, increase knowledge of strategic planning, program and budget management, promote diversity and inclusion, and provide a deeper understanding of the global challenges facing the United States. The course should include a domestic component to deepen senior leaders' understanding of the domestic political, social, and economic environment in which we operate, and allow participants to engage with audiences that may not have familiarity with the role of the State Department or the work of American diplomats. So we thank you all for this time. There's a lot more in our blueprint as we go forward, but we welcome your questions as time permits. And now I'm going to introduce Ambassador Joellen Powell to talk about personnel.
other challenge person takes the podium. Like everybody else, I want to echo the enormous appreciation for the efforts of everybody at ASU, Kathy, our legislative drafter, Charlie, our editor, Kathy Guest, our leadership team, Mark, Marcy. You know, this has been a tremendous experience, I think, for all of us. And I also want to say that the department's leadership has already done so much in the HR arena, in the human resources arena, to recruit for, to build a more diverse foreign service, to emphasize professional development in its promotion and assignments processes, to introduce family-friendly initiatives, to improve communication and transparency in HR transactions, and to listen to its clients. So these roadmaps here build on initiatives that the department is already undertaking, and they deserve enormous credit for it. You'll see when you look through the report that the HR blueprints have a great deal of overlap with Ambassadors Barr and Smith's training and professional development blueprints. I really think that in many respects, the HR blueprints support the training and professional development blueprints that they have talked about. But the HR blueprints will also address future staffing needs, recruitment, greater emphasis on having career officers in senior positions, ensuring that senior foreign service officers have experience in both policy and operational functions, and family members and supporting our families. So there are 5 main areas of focus. First, recruitment. We need to recruit for and hire people with the skills that the Foreign Service needs now and will need in the future. So thinking about new skill sets, we have proposed in this blueprint a $2.5 million budget for a public service campaign, a broad outreach campaign, and $500,000 for professional training support, professional recruiting support for the Bureau of Global Talent Management, a sharp and focused recruitment effort. On training and professional development, as Dan and Joyce have said, we need to take the next step beyond just establishing a training complement to ensure that once trained, new officers have positions to go to overseas at the right grades with adequate supervision, mentoring, and oversight to grow and succeed professionally. As Dan and Joyce have said, establishing more rotational positions at posts overseas and combine them with shorter detail or practicum assignments domestically, not necessarily in the State Department, to give officers at the entry and mid-levels a broader experience earlier in their careers, to give greater emphasis to developing and using language skills, particularly in hard and super hard languages. We propose specific incentives to achieve that. MSIs for achievement beyond the 3-3 level in hard and super hard languages, and additional time in class for people who go back and do a second tour using that hard or super hard language and who retain those language skills over time. We want to assign greater value to training and non-traditional assignments in the promotion process and make them requirements for promotion into the senior foreign service. We propose to make senior promotions class-wide and require demonstrated operational as well as policy skills, because successful senior officers need both. We want to have the right positions in the right places overseas as well as domestically, because this training complement is not going to enter the Foreign Service and spend the next 27 years at FSI. They need positions to go to. And staffing analysis will be a continuous process, and it may determine the need, as Dan and Joyce have intimated, for additional overseas positions in addition, beyond the training complement. We cannot let that training complement get poached to address staffing crises overseas. Fourth, recognition of the professional foreign service.
with a target of 75% of assistant secretary positions to be filled by career professionals. The undersecretaries for political affairs and management and the director general, we propose be filled by active service career officers of the greatest distinction and specific qualifications in regional, multilateral, or functional experience and seniority. And fifth, for our family members, family member employment has made great strides in the department in the last decade or so, but we propose to plug some gaps that still remain. For family member, working couple employment, we propose to authorize unlimited non-competitive eligibility for eligible family members to apply non-competitively for positions for which they qualify in the civil service. We would propose authority for state to make domestic family member appointments as well as overseas family member appointments. And we would propose that appointment eligible family members who are otherwise qualified be eligible to apply for foreign service promotions through the Mustang program. That's a brief summary of a big agenda. I look forward to hearing questions as the question and answer period approaches. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Ambassador Patrick Kennedy.
Thank you all very much. The U.S. military is prepared to respond to crises for many reasons. But one major factor is that it has the ability to call upon the trained personnel of the reserves and the National Guard to supplement the regular forces quickly when a crisis arises. The State Department, which is the first line, the forward line in our national security, does not have that capability and the ability to rapidly deploy to mitigate the impact of a crisis or potentially to even avoid one. And that is what is needed. The State Department has performed well, cobbling together retirees, temporary appointees, personal service contractors, and contracting companies for additional support. And while there have been successes, it is not nearly as efficient or effective as the Defense Department with its cadre of well-trained on-call reservists and the National Guard. So much of what we propose is drawn from the systems and the processes that have been developed and improved over the years by the Department of Defense. The proposal for a diplomatic reserve corps envisions a 5-year buildup to a strength of 1,000 personnel. In year one, the foundation will be built. State Department senior leadership would receive and review proposals from the department's bureaus and offices and determine, rank order in effect, what particular skill sets will likely be needed to address the crises of the future. An office would be set up in the Bureau of Global Talent Management to direct the effort to recruit, support, and manage the Reserve Corps. And the necessary supporting players, diplomatic security, medical, the National Foreign Affairs Training Center, finance, etc., would ramp up to start the process. Recruitment would begin drawing not only from State Department retirees, just like the military reserves and the National Guard include their former active duty personnel in many cases, but also from other federal agencies, state, local, county and tribal entities, think tanks, educational institutions, and the American public in general. A cadre of retired State Department personnel living hopefully in all 50 states would become recruiters, reaching out widely and backed up by a nationwide public outreach effort. Thus, in each of the following 4 years, 250 personnel would join the Diplomatic Reserve Corps, receive the necessary training and onboarding, and be prepared to deploy as needed. Like the military, the members of the Diplomatic Reserve Corps would train for 1 weekend per month and 2 full weeks per year. This training would be delivered at the National Foreign Affairs Training Center in coordination with the bureaus and offices that would use the Corps' skills in a crisis and would take advantage of the excellent work that NFATC has developed in distance learning. Sorry about that. As I've told Mark, I have a new phone and it won't turn off. See. I was saying that the excellent work that NFATC has developed in distance learning that would allow us to avoid bringing 1,000 members of the Corps to Washington every month, an expense that would be just outrageous. You think of what the weekend duty, that is a good example of where distance learning would work. Orientation, area studies, language training in cases in areas where the language would be exceedingly helpful. And the 2-week-a-year period, think of it as bringing personnel to DC or sending them to the field to both to learn the operations of an embassy that they would be partnering with in the case of a deployment, and also just to get to know the culture and the people. The best estimate is that a fully formed 1,000 member Corps would cost about $30 million per year, with that number rising 3 to 5% depending on the rate of inflation, plus about $11.5 million a year in department support costs to back up, to manage, to train, to equip, to deploy. Those numbers are in the 5th year. Year 0 plus when you arrive at the 1,000 number. The additional number, the additional cost, which is the hardest to predict, is the actual cost for deployments, an unknowable figure since the size, shape, and duration of international events is totally unpredictable. But it is logical to assume that any deployment costs for the Corps would be offset to at least some extent as the financial resources currently utilized to deal with crises as we cobble them together, bringing on temporary employees, bringing retirees back, would be redirected to cover the deployment costs of the Diplomatic Reserve Corps. And if the Reserve Corps is successful, as I think many of us would foresee, in catching a crisis on the leading edge before it becomes a widespread and costly endeavor, the Corps would probably pay for itself. The result, I think we all believe, would give the State Department the enhanced capability to address the myriad of future challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we will take your questions, starting with the audience here and alternating with questions from our online audience. Question first. I see a hand way in the back.
Yeah, this is Pete Romero, and excuse me if my neck is a
Your
little
mic's not
sore.
working. Your mic's not
It's
working. Either that or my ears aren't.
Yeah, excuse me if my neck is a little sore. Somebody yelled out, Mr. Ambassador, and 25 necks snapped. And I was one of them. But let me just say that Laura and I, right next to me, are here to help in the rollout with our podcast, American Diplomat. We'd love to take this out. We've got listenership in all the states, and we'd love to do whatever we can do to help move this ahead. One of the things that I get a lot in our demographic, our listening demographic, is between the ages of about 24 and 44, and that is the difficulty of the Foreign Service test, particularly as it relates to the length of time that it takes. When you look at that, and that's been a perennial thing, the statement of the department basically saying that they were going to try to lean into more STET type candidates for work. Did you all address at all the manpower needs as they relate to the future and what diplomats will face.
Joe Ellen.
Addressed it primarily by saying the first step is going to be to build our training complement. We do anticipate that beyond that, there will be additional needs. What we don't know is exactly how much. Yes, we've signaled that this necessity is likely to occur, that we will need additional positions overseas primarily, but perhaps domestically as well. What we don't know is once we have achieved that training complement, what the new demands will be. So it's an open door. We certainly have acknowledged that the skill sets required for the Foreign Service are likely to change going forward. It's something that we've addressed with AAD has addressed in other reports and publications, others have as well. But certainly looking for the future generations of the Foreign Service, they're not going to look like my father's Foreign Service. They're certainly not even going to look like mine.
I know we already had one online question. Oh, yeah, please.
This is a mic? Okay. I thought it was a phone. Oh, okay. First of all, I'm Tom Miller, one of those 25 people whose neck snapped, Pete. I would like to compliment all the people who've been involved in this. I've seen many, many studies over time. I think this is the best I've seen over many, many years, for two reasons. Number one, you didn't bite off everything. You're not trying to rewrite the Foreign Service Act. And as one of the people who was involved in the 1980 Act, I think that was the right call. And secondly, you did something that I've never seen before, and that's you put legislative language in here. And that is really brilliant because we collectively have written so many reports about remaking the Foreign Service. We never put legislative language in here, and it's all been ignored on the Hill. So bravo for those things. I have a question for Pat on the Reserve Corps, a couple of questions. And then one well, let me do the Reserve Corps. Who are these folks that we're going to be talking about? Pat, I tried to get through this thing, but I fell asleep. Who are these folks? I know they would be responding to emergencies and kind of, unanticipated events, but that's kind of what CSO was set up to do years ago, and it really hasn't worked. And you more than anyone else can address the question of culture. The CSO thing hasn't worked for contingency and stabilization operations because we haven't changed our culture at all in the department. The regional bureaus want to run the crises. They don't want to let a new bureau like CSO into the thing. And I can just see that same kind of cultural problem with Reserve Corps. So Pat, if you could kindly address those. And then the other question I had quickly was, we're talking about changing the priorities of how people get trained and everything else. And I don't know if this is a Dan or a Joyce, or I don't know who answers this question, but it comes down still, if you're in the Foreign Service, to promotion boards. And eons ago, I served on a couple of promotion boards. And you can have all the precepts in the world, and somewhere Eric's around, and I know Eric spends a lot of time negotiating these precepts, but at the end of the day, you have 6 people in a room who are largely looking at their experience and saying, my experience was very valuable, and I want to promote people who've had similar types of experience. So how do you deal with that? Pat, why don't you go first on the reserve stuff?
Thank you. I'm going to just be blunt. I did not put together a list of who the 1,000 would be. I thought that was beyond my expertise, and certainly the world keeps changing. So the concept that we have outlined in the paper is that each bureau and office would have the opportunity to present to a committee composed of the undersecretaries and the executive secretary what they see on the horizon and potentially over the horizon. What skill sets do they see are needed in their bureau or their office, if it's an independent office? What skill sets are going to be needed to deal with the crisis they see forming in the future? But to the problem you talk about, the CSO and the ownership, these personnel would be owned by central personnel. The Bureau personnel, Global Talent Management, owns these personnel. And in a crisis, that Bureau office goes to central personnel and says, we have this crisis and we know that you have on that roster of 1,000, this and this and this and this skill sets. We need those people to be deployed, called up right now to go forward. And I think that is the best way to do it. Let the actors, the action officers, pick the skill sets that are needed, but don't make it proprietary because their skill sets, say in engineering or peace building, that cross many lines. And so the combination of recruiting, but having them available as a central pool, just like the U.S. military reserves and the Guard are. You need a skill set, you go to the 97th General Hospital or whatever and get the people, but they're not owned by the area commander, their own central.
Tom, I think that the promotion system that we have, certainly warts and all, still relies on using the precepts as the basis on which peers judge peers. And one suggestion that I had received early on in this process, talking to some folks in an informal focus group, was that the Foreign Service should have professional promotion boards that did nothing else, that they would spend 10 years or 12 years reviewing promotion files. And I thought to myself, that is the last thing I would want, because the fact that the promotion boards change year to year brings in new perspectives, new judgments, new points of view. And I think that is good and healthy. I did not put specific recommendations in about promotions in my particular blueprint, because I'm aware that the department currently has a consultant on contract that is looking at that very issue. So I would like to give the department space to see where that comes out. As I said, this project, I think, is still very much an evolutionary project. I don't think this is by any means the end, and it will continue to evolve. But I do think that the premises for promotion, the precepts that are negotiated each year, are a very solid and sound basis. And my own experience on promotion boards is that, yes, that's what the boards consider.
Anyone else? Yes, here. Front.
Thank you. I'd like to join everyone else in complimenting the work of the team. The blueprint is outstanding and well needed. But I'm Stephen McGann, by the way. I should have mentioned that first. And one of the 25 is next snapped as well. One of the things, though, I wanted to ask was that the blueprint does take into account many of the things we can do now under the existing Foreign Service Act of 1980. It does also, I think, look at ways in which we can implement things now within existing resources. I mention that because, as you well know, legislative fixes are fraught with dangerous crosswinds, and they're all swirling around Capitol Hill. So I was wondering, are there other ways in which we can look at approaching this? For example, if we want to expand the training complement, let's not say we're doing it for the whole of the foreign service, but maybe in bits and pieces. Maybe we actually need more refugee and migration officers for PRM. And we're expanding training there. There may be more of an appetite on the Hill for humanitarian assistance, for example, or there may be more of an appetite for mitigating the negative impacts of climate change. I was just wondering, how do we do this in a way in which we don't have to worry about severe legislative fixes and to work within existing authorizations and appropriations? Because what I don't want to happen is that we have these great ideas and for the next 2 years, we're on continuing resolution. So.
Dan, Joyce?
No, I think this is an important point. I really appreciate your raising it. It's a lot of things that what we envision we can't do without additional resources. We do know the department has requested some of these resources, even in the current environment. For instance, for this next fiscal year, it has requested 250 additional positions for the training complement, which we believe is a foundation, is a beginning of what we will need as we go forward. It's going to require sustained senior level engagement at the level of the secretary and obviously support on the Hill. What we outlined, frankly, is the equivalent of what Colin Powell did at the beginning of his tenure when he did the Diplomatic Readiness Initiative. In fact, it's almost identical in terms of the numbers. But we also know what happened to that. That is, you built this, you created this Diplomatic Readiness Initiative, and then you got Iraq, you had Afghanistan, you had all of these demands that came along that ate up these resources, which is why we've gone to great lengths and want to thank Charlie Armstrong in particular for his drafting to try and protect it as best we can, to make it as hard as we can. When the secretary decides that there's an urgent situation that requires taking people out of training, there's got to be a report to Congress to talk about that, to explain what we're going to do and how we're going to correct that over time, because otherwise past history has indicated we're just going to, it will disappear, and we know it will disappear when things come along. So we do think there are things that could be done now in the current environment. We think the department's request on the fiscal year 2023 is in the right direction. It is a good foundation. I think this secretary is committed to reform and to building the capacity of the department, but we know what the political environment is in Washington, how quickly the winds can change. So it's not certain, it's not guaranteed, but we think there's a good foundation to go forward here. Joyce?
And also, particular issues usually get what they want. If there is appetite on the Hill to augment something that we're doing, that money will come, we will get those positions. But our perspective was to try and have an overall plan that supported the department for a career investment in its people. And that's going to take time, and it has to be big. But, emergencies always get taken care of. And that's kind of the way we usually operate. But it's not going to support the department in the long term if it really needs to change how it educates and it supports its career people. So that's why we spent a lot of time thinking about what do we need to do big and long to have the result we want at the end.
Mark?
Thank you. If Pat will allow me, Stephen, I just wanted to make one additional comment, because your point about, and can't we just find people for refugees, for climate, engineers, all different kinds of things, data scientists we thought about. Part of the answer to the question is that's what the Reserve Corps is about. So when Tom, you asked sort of who are these people? Well, they're a combination of people who could be deployed, right? Everybody would have to sign up to be deployed if asked. But it's also designed so that we can do exactly what you want. Let's say that you needed many more people who really understood, the physics of climate change, or you decided that you wanted to use, gaming as a way now to teach people about diplomacy or to promote the United States. You'd be able to do that through the Reserve Corps. And so I think, again, Pat will correct me if I'm wrong, but it's one of the advantages of the Reserve Corps is it can try to answer the second part of your question.
We've been, Steve's question and the answers that we've heard remind me of the next step. I mean, yes, people can understand refugees or climate, but we're talking about diplomatic readiness. We're talking about representation. These are pretty vague concepts that don't have an automatic constituency in Congress or in the public. And I'm curious what our advocacy strategy is. How are we going to get the people around the country to say, yes, we need this, and this plan is either in whole or in part what we need to adopt in legislation, because this is not going to be just writing a document or even proposing legislative language. It's going to make this a priority among all the other priorities that the Congress thinks it has.
Jimmy, thank you very much. So our idea is this, which is you have to start someplace, right? And what we learned a little bit in phase one was that we had these 10 ideas, and if you will, they kind of ran up against the point that you just made. And people would say, well, these are pretty good ideas, you know, so how are you going to do them? And so this phase was about how you're going to do them. And our bet, we may be wrong, and you know, if a year from now we're all at this lunch and nothing's happened, so there you are. But our bet is this. Our bet is that if you walk into a congressional office, or you go to see John Bass, or you go to see somebody who's got responsibility for these questions, and you say, here's the difference. The difference is today, instead of saying we should have a reserve corps, we're saying we should have a reserve corps. And oh, by the way, here's how this is done. Right. And my instinct about this is, at least from what Marcy and I have heard from phase one, and I think about phase two as well, is that the effort to try this with this much more specificity will be much more successful than anything we might have tried in the past, number one. Number two, and John, you know, this is for him to speak, not for me. But our other belief is that there are not 10 recommendations here, there are 4. And one of the reasons that we chose these 4 was they seemed to us implementable, they seemed to us practical, and they seemed to us also that they would garner support, right? So today's the first day of this, right? So I think, as Marcy said, that we hope that you will now become part of the effort to sell this. And I think someone else said, I think Joe Ellen said, you know, this is the beginning of a next phase, right? Might not be that we're involved in it, but if somebody's interested in this, for goodness sakes, you know, we've had phase one, we've had phase two, and what you're talking about is phase three, right? This won't sell itself. It has to be brought to people. But our belief is that you're much better off. We're much better off with a concrete idea than another proposal that says, here's a good idea, see you later.
If I could add one thing that hasn't been brought up, all of you and all of the people who are online audience will be getting an electronic copy of this plan. And what I would recommend, I know what I plan to do with my electronic copy, is share this with your friends, your family, your contacts, because, you know, the comment you made about what do people know about it, or what, well, they don't know about it if we don't tell them. And if we share it, more people will know. So that would be one way you could help to achieve and I'd like to, we have one of those outreach targets here, the World Affairs Council. Welcome, sir. But the more you share it, the more people know about what we do and what we're wanting to do, and the more support you help us garner for it. I'd like to get one. Oh, I'm sorry. You go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on the last question. I think not only, well, what I observe here is you have a very powerful alumni group as well, and that these resources, these human resources, can be deployed not just on the Hill, but actually in district and state offices around the country where people will listen and World Affairs Councils will be happy to help and facilitate. I also observed that as great as this document is, I don't see people in it. And I haven't been on the State Department's website where I've seen a lot of color of you in action, and to have a complimentary photo spread, whether it's in print and online, that shows that you are people and that this is about people. That's what's going to resonate in those districts, especially the tougher ones where you might have some adverse pushback. And so I would recommend that as part of the advocacy strategy. And I can't wait to help out.
Okay, before we take another question from here, I really have to sort of give the people online a chance. We have a question here. I'll give this one to you, Mark. Will you support another organization that takes a blueprint and tries to convert it to an amendment to existing legislation? That's the question.
I'm not, with respect, I'm not sure I understand. I don't know how to answer that question, since I don't know who the organization is or what the blueprint is. If that person would like to sort of send their question back and be more specific, I'd be glad to try to answer it.
If that question is still online, if you would like to make your question more specific, we will resubmit. Another question in the room. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Kevin Kim. I'm a State Department civil servant currently detailed to Senator Hagerty's office. I'm not sure how many folks in the room are aware. Well, obviously I'm not one of the 25 ambassadors, but there's bipartisan legislation that Senator Hagerty and Senator Cardin have worked on in the past year to improve training at the State Department and to form a commission to reform and modernize the State Department. So there is certainly interest, at least on the Senate side, about this subject. But just on a personal note, I've noticed that the words "us," Foreign Service, and the State Department are used synonymously. They're interchangeable, it appears. And it seems for a 37-year-old civil servant who spent 10 years in the department, who loves the department, it's deeply discouraging to hear absolutely nothing about the civil service. And my former boss is here, was a career ambassador. So I think as former senior leaders of the department, look forward to phase 3 to consider the other half of the department as well. I fully recognize that it's hard to make wholesale changes, but for someone in the younger generation of the department, it would be encouraging to hear.
Thank you, Kevin. I just want to say, and Joyce and I tried to make it clear, one of the things that was a guiding principle for us from the beginning was the need to incorporate the civil service in all of our recommendations with regard to training and development. We recognize there are challenges in the civil service personnel system that will create some obstacles, and there's a need for more flexibility. We're going to have to work with OPM. We're going to have to work with the Hill, but we think that's vital, that we cannot neglect the training and development, professional development of our civil service colleagues and continue to lead American foreign policy. So I agree with you fully, but it permeates at least our section of this report.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Hi, the name is Russell Brooks, career Foreign Service officer, but not one of the 25 ambassadors that are here, despite the gray hair. 2 questions. One has to do with personnel. I don't think I heard anything about how one would address the traditionally hard to fill posts or positions at hard to fill posts. That's a continuing problem. You've talked about increasing our numbers. You talked about increasing our training, but I don't think you've addressed how you're going to overcome that hurdle. Second, you mentioned that it would be great if the State Department led some of the, I believe is the interagency policy committees. If State Department officers led them as opposed to folks assigned to the National Security Council. I imagine that's going to be a hard one for people to swallow. But nevertheless, could someone speak to that? Thank you.
Okay, Joellen, you want to take the first part and then Mike can take the second?
You're right. I did not mention anything specifically about the chronic problem of hard to fill posts. Being one of the 25 ambassadors in the room, I was at a post where, you know, most of our positions went begging for lack of bidders. The report, when you read through it, the blueprint will address such things as the importance of not putting first tour officers in single section posts, of not just easily and readily ceding mid-level positions to the entry level. That doesn't do the officer any good, and it doesn't do the institution any good. I think implicit throughout the report is that if we have enough people, that we have a training complement in place and we are not then forced to take a long staffing gap somewhere else, where we can then have the indulgence of having both the officer in training and the position at the post filled, that will go, at least in some measure, to address the problem. Hard to fill posts are always going to be hard to fill. The department has employed a number of incentives over the years to encourage people to bid on and to stay at hard to fill posts, including things like a special incentive if you stay for a third year. There are a number of incentives that are already in play. And so no, this report doesn't address them specifically, but what we do try to do is underscore the importance of making sure that the positions are filled by people at the right grade with the right amount of oversight, support, mentoring, training, coaching to enable those officers for success.
Thank you very much for raising that point about the leadership of the interagency policy coordinating committees. You are 100% correct. That is a high hill to climb. But I've learned from one of my dear colleagues here who joined me in creating this lab for ASU on leadership, diplomacy, and national security, that the essence of leadership is trust. The State Department needs to earn the trust of the interagency community that it is capable of leading in a whole of government effort on behalf of our nation, rather than leading on behalf of itself and its own, whatever interests it may have, no matter how noble they are. So, as you know, there are multiple layers of interagency coordination, and we're not asking for the principals, we're not asking for the deputies, we're asking for the 6th floor. Very important people, but we're asking for assistant secretary level to go ahead and build that trust that leadership requires in order to be able to be effective. So just like Mark was saying earlier, we're putting this out there because we think it's the right thing. We wrote the language to rewrite the National Security Memorandum that basically says, here it is, the State Department is now in charge. Still, the National Security Advisor will assign the State Department to do this, but the State Department chairs that committee. Now, my request would be, give us a chance. Not us, give John Bass and all our serving colleagues right now the chance to demonstrate they can lead. And then if they can't, you can go ahead and take them to task, but don't assume from the beginning that they're not able to do this. But you're very right. This is a high hill to climb, and we've got our hiking boots on.
Mark, would you or Marcy have any last words? Please.
Thank you all. I'm John Bass, current Undersecretary for Management. For those who can't see the disembodied voice on the screen. Just a couple of reactions. First, thank you very much. There's an awful lot of great content, but I think most importantly, a lot of informed, deliberative content that clearly reflects lived experience, consultation, a certain amount of trial and error over the years. And I really appreciate everybody's dedication of their time, energy, and experience to putting these ideas forward. Secondly, to confirm something that Mark said, there is quite a bit of overlap between the areas that you've chosen to focus on and areas that are a priority for current department leadership. With, without having seen in detail the content of these proposals, I anticipate that they're going to be very helpful as we work to flesh out some of the other aspects that we've been working on internally, or want to take to the next stage. Thirdly, along those lines, a number of the things that you've heard about are currently in motion. And we're doing our best to both build them out, but also to sustain them and avoid the resource trap that Dan Smith spoke to, and that is implicit behind all of Pat's work on a reserve corps, which is to say, we need to be careful not to eat our seed corn. As soon as we got our FY22 appropriation and all those new positions, I can tell you the demand signal for those positions was oversubscribed by about 250%. And at least half of those were compelling priorities, speaking to some of the current high demands. We have not given those training positions out, and we're not going to. And we're just going to continue to endure this so that we can build out properly both these additional positions to support long-term professional development, but also the mobility piece that allows, importantly, our civil service colleagues to take advantage of some of these opportunities as well. Last thing I'd note, and it's an observation, and I think perhaps something to think about going forward, and maybe it's blended in these various pieces. But the presentations, the discussion, seems to me implicit in it is the notion of a career in the State Department, in the civil service, and in the foreign service. And I would say one of the things that has surprised me in coming into this position is the percentage of our workforce with fewer than 10 years that are either walking in the door expecting not to be there for a full career, or much more skeptical that it is worth the effort. And so I would encourage you and find fruitful thoughts and deliberation on how we take advantage of talent that wants to be serving the nation for 5 or 10 year chunks, on top of that talent that we would be able to call on in a reserve capacity for shorter, discrete periods of time. And once again, thank you all very much for all the great discussion and all the work that went into this.
Well, thank you all. We've reached our limit, and I know there are probably more questions. I apologize for not getting to them. And thank you all very much. I will now turn the mic back to our host, Mike Polt.
Thank you very much. John, thank you very much for those comments. And thank you very much for making the time to be here and listen to us, to engage with us, and to all the team at the department that has been so open and so willing to engage with us throughout this entire phase of our work. We're deeply grateful to you, to your work, and deeply conscious of how complex your mission is and your assignment is in taking the department forward, where we know you and the Secretary want the Foreign Service and the Civil Service, the entire family of the State Department, to go to provide the kind of foreign policy that this country needs. Just want to remind us all that we certainly were raised in the Foreign Service as cynical people. And when you talk to us about reform plans, the automatic answer is eye rolling back to the back of your head, never to reappear. And it is very easy to critique, and it's much harder. Again, someone who's taught me, it's very easy to critique, it's much harder to build. All we're really asking here today is for all of us to help our currently serving colleagues, civil service and foreign service, to build that career. And I agree with you, be it a long-term or a short-term time serving our country in a 21st century environment that is simply not the same as the one that I entered in, that most of us 25 head snappers in here entered in when we joined the Foreign Service some decades ago. So I thank you all very much for being here today. ASU is intensely proud of being able to host, having been able to host this entire effort. It'll stay and continue to be engaged to go ahead and provide whatever resources the university can provide to go ahead and keep this moving. This is the beginning, not the end. I know the books are heavy. Please take one anyway. And of course, they are all available electronic to all of you. Thank you very much for coming today. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.